Greeting fellow attendees at the MELTA 2021 conference. Welcome to my talk. Today I'm going to be talking about using Zoom as a telecollaborative tool to enhance cultural competences between language learning students. I'm sorry to say that my co-researcher Josephine cannot be with us today, but certainly she sends her greetings. So without further ado, let's get right into the presentation. So today's talk is entitled Cultural Development in the Language Learning Classroom via Telecollaboration, Zooming Ahead. And of course, that means we're using Zoom. I'd like to talk a little bit about cultural competences and what they mean and how they are used in the classroom. And then I'm going to talk about what we wanted to achieve and how we wanted to achieve it. And then I'm going to talk about how we carried it out using Zoom. And then I'm going to talk about some of the benefits we received and how cultural competences were enhanced using Zoom as a telecollaborative tool. And then I'm going to sum up in one slide. So what are cultural competences? Well, the cultural competences basically means the understanding of a culture, either your own, or in most cases, we're talking about another culture because it's assumed that we have a certain amount of understanding of our own culture. And concerning the ways it's relevant to English language learning, well, there's this belief that by understanding culture, one understands the language better, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to prove otherwise. And there's this stance that cultural knowledge helps English as a second language learners learn and understand how to use English better so they can survive in their community. So what do we mean by intercultural competency? Of course, it's this idea that exchanging cultural information is a good thing because one starts to understand oneself better, but more importantly, one starts to understand the other culture better. And why is it important? Well, studying abroad in an English-speaking country. Well, of course, it's important to understand the culture of the native speakers so that you can survive and do well within the culture, because language learning, as I've already mentioned, is more than just learning grammar and the rules, but also navigating your way within a society. However, one of the problems is that this kind of approach tends to be unidirectional. So if we're studying in the United States, the learners are receiving all of the culture from their surroundings, but there's not much exchange actually. So how about in EFL or ELF settings, such English as a lingua franca, such as in Malaysia? Well, it could be dependent upon the teacher. The teacher may be very good at sharing cultural insights from the culture from which he or she comes. And it might be dependent on the textbook. Nevertheless, it still tends to be unidirectional in some ways. The teacher may promote ideas and images from English-speaking countries, maybe the country where that teacher is from, like I'm from the United States, so if I shared some things, I might focus on what it's like being an American. But again, these things tend to focus on the big five countries, the UK, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the United States. And textbooks themselves tend to promote images and ideas from these big five English-speaking countries. In other words, the notion of exchange is really kind of missing. And it might be even difficult for a teacher who's a native speaker of the same language that the students are speaking in outside of the English language learning class, for example. So it's more difficult for such a teacher to kind of share cultural knowledge in some cases. The teacher may not have been overseas themselves. And the notion of exchange is also likely difficult when the student's mother tongue is the same as all the other students in the class. So this idea of exchange becomes more difficult. So as a way to see if cultural knowledge is spread diversely, I decided to check a very famous textbook called Grammar Dimensions. Now I don't want to denigrate this book too much because we use it in the class and we chose this book from among many different grammar books. But I just wanted to do a kind of general survey to see what kind of images would be promoted by such a textbook. Would there be broad topics and from various countries and backgrounds, or would it be more focused on, English-speaking countries, the big five countries? And what I found is that there was a very strong focus on the big five countries. As you can see, here are some images I clipped from that textbook. We have John Lennon up in the upper left. We have Halloween in the lower right. We have these actresses from Hollywood in the lower right-hand corner. We have this map of New York and New Hampshire, Vermont, and Massachusetts in the center. And then we have this article about Hurricane Katrina in the United States. And when I looked through the textbook, I found that, out of 70 or so photos and stories, 70 photos, only 3 were outside of the big five countries. One of them is here in the middle. You can see the minarets in red square. And in general, all the stories and all the photos were basically from the big five countries. So in other words, how can cultural information be exchanged in such cases? Again, I say it could be dependent on the teacher. Maybe the teacher is very good at sharing cultural knowledge from other places, but the teacher is only one person. And so the possibilities are limited. The teacher can share in the classroom, but outside of that, it becomes very difficult. Or we could say it's dependent upon the textbook. And you may say, well, that's a pretty old textbook you showed us just now. Well, I just looked at another textbook recently that a student brought to my office that was published in 2020, very famous publisher and a very well liked textbook. And again, I found only 3 images that were outside mainstream big five countries. And I think there was one from Hong Kong maybe, and one from Beijing. So using the textbooks to increase cultural knowledge from various places is also limited. And the final option, which I think is the best option, is you could incorporate technology, which is under investigated, but can be used, and that's what we decided to do using Zoom. And of course, we could use Zoom to exchange cultural knowledge with inner circle countries, and this has been done on occasion. But in our case, we thought it would be nice that EFL students exchange cultural information from their own personal backgrounds. This could also be done in EFL countries like Malaysia. Our objective then was to provide an opportunity for students to really exchange cultural information using Zoom. Our idea would be that students could exchange deeply their own culture, which they knew well, and they would have to do it with the virtual lingua franca, which happened to be English. So it was a win-win situation because we could have them share cultural knowledge and we could have them share in English. And since these were based upon language learning classes, that was really great for us. And it was hoped that students would share their cultural information easily with one another. We took it outside of the classroom, and students connected to other students using Zoom on their own, and they recorded their sessions. Now, we wanted to have some kind of ground rules as to what would indicate to us that cultural competences were being enhanced. So we used Lobianco's tenets of cultural competences. And one of the keys, he says, is verbosity between interlocutors. In other words, their willingness to communicate. And also interpersonal relationships. Would they be developed? Did they understand the rules of conversational engagement? And the third one, which is equally as important, is politeness. Not only how not to be rude, but also how to be indirect or direct. How to be funny. Could you tell a joke? Or could you understand a joke? How to show humility. Would you use self-deprecation in cases to enhance conversational flow? Were you able to show positive and negative politeness to your interlocutors? Lobianco also talked about rituals, and they may be important if you're living abroad in another culture, such as in the United States, but we didn't think it was so important to focus on that. And since we asked students to do this autonomously outside the classroom itself wasn't a factor. So we had 6 female Japanese university students, my students, and they held collaborative meetings using Zoom with 5 Taiwanese university students. One Taiwanese student had to have 2 partners, so because we had 6 and 5, but that was fine. The student volunteered freely. Students recorded their meetings, and those meetings were automatically uploaded to the Zoom server, and we had access to them. The idea was that each student would bring 3, what they considered iconic images of their culture. Following this, an online questionnaire was given to all of the participants aimed at eliciting what kind of knowledge they, cultural knowledge they felt they received by participating in the activity. We based our categories that we found on Sharma's grounded theory, where she talks about categories arising from data. So we looked at the interaction, and we also looked at the questionnaire to determine which categories we thought were prevalent. And the first factor that we found was enjoyment. Enjoyment is a key factor in this kind of study. It enhances, it fulfills Lobianco's notion of politeness. Here you can see lots of, besides the students just saying it, like from the questionnaire point 1, but they also expressed it in their interaction, as we can see from this dialogue. Hi, nice to meet you, nice to meet you. You are so pretty, uses of positive politeness. The second category to arise that we thought was important was expressions of culture. Here, the Japanese student was talking about the famous Red Gate at Hiroshima and how it's very important to her personally, but also to Japanese society in general because of the way it was made and how long it has been there, and just the sense of, this is really a cultural icon in Japan. And the exchange is really quite, how can I say, exciting for the learners. I might add here that the Japanese student, my student was fairly low level, much lower than the Taiwanese student in this case. But it was really quite impressive to see how they, how they helped each other along in this kind of conversation until the Japanese learner felt comfortable to share anything she wanted, and she felt very comfortable by the end. This is the topic actually that followed that one, where he's talking about what he thinks of his own country and how he loves Taiwan. So expression of culture fulfills Lobianco's tenets of verbosity, and it also relates highly to Deardorff's notion of successful cultural exchange, namely attitude. Is there respect or openness between interlocutors? Is there curiosity? Do they navigate the skills of listening and observing well? And of course, we must have comprehension and understanding of culture. And I think if you saw all of the dialects, you'd agree that this was very successful in this respect. Of course, not only understanding culture, but also increases of culture awareness and knowledge. And students talked about enjoying learning and talking about culture from the other viewpoint. And of course, this fulfills the same tenets as expressions of culture. Another category that arose, and again, this is related to culture, is were cultural perceptions altered in any way? And here's a conversation about manga. One of my students really liked to not only collect manga, but she loved to draw manga. And she was very, very good at it. And when her Taiwanese partner found out about it, he became so excited because he liked manga and he was so thrilled that he could meet someone who could actually draw manga as well as my student could. And as you can see at the end, he says, "May I have a photo? I will cherish it. Wow, beautiful picture this." And he really was excited. And you could tell that changed his attitude. Not that he had a bad attitude, but it increased his interest in Japan and in talking to my student in particular. And of course, this fulfilled Lobianco's interpersonal relationship building, as well as being polite. You can see many cases of positive politeness, even in that short clip of dialogue. And the final, one more category to arise was interpersonal relationship building and camaraderie. And these are from the questionnaire. I could make friends from overseas. I think this project is good for me to communicate with other countries' people. It was fun to talk to new people, and so on. And here's a clip from the dialogue. And this again, actually, this is the dialogue between my lower level English student from Japan and this kind of higher level Japanese man. And he uses positive politeness to build her up so that she will feel more comfortable in the conversation. And he tells her, you know, I don't really hear your accent. And she feels very, very relieved to hear that. So again, this fulfills this kind of interpersonal relationship building and also politeness. So our objective here was to promote an activity that increased intercultural exchange of information and cultural competences. In that regard, I think we're successful, and those categories arose, and we found many cases of relationship building, politeness, and verbosity was found throughout the dialogues. So I can say that there was an exchange of intercultural knowledge. So cultural competency of the other culture definitely was enhanced. If you're interested in our paper, you can find it at this website on academia.edu, and it has been published in Foreign Language Annals as of this spring. Let us know what you think. You can contact me as well. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take your questions now.